Good afternoon. This is CIVE 634, Surface Water Hydrology. And I'm Professor Victor Ponce from San Diego State University. And the class today is CIVE 151, meaning 15-week first class of 2 classes that we teach every week. This is the last formal week of classes. Next week is going to be the 16th week, which is basically dedicated to student presentations. So this is the last week. Today and Wednesday's class is going to be the 2 last classes in this course of surface water hydrology. And the subject that I have chosen for this week is global climate change. Very important subject for everybody. Today, I intend to cover the first 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I1, I2, I4. And Wednesday, I will cover I5 to I8. We should have plenty of time to cover these subjects in detail. The first subject I titled it Global Climate Change, Sustainable Development and Environmental Ethics. First, let me give you a history as to how is it that I got involved in this subject. I started hydraulics from the beginning, and I practiced in hydraulics and hydrology and water resources for the last roughly 50 years. And I'm retiring, as you guys know. I've repeated it many times, next week or the following week, couple weeks. In the year 1990, the environmental movement was coming up very strong. And I realized that I had to upgrade my skills in dealing or talking or thinking about environmental subjects. So I decided to teach the basic undergraduate class in environmental engineering. I think at that time it was called Introduction to Environmental Science. That's what the name of that class was. Many of you that had gotten a degree at San Diego State, maybe recently, probably have already taken that class. I believe its number is 355. So I taught that class for several years, 3 or 4 years. And I became aware of the environment. And you know, the environment is a subject which covers everything. So it goes into biology, it goes into chemistry, this and that, global warming, the world, and so forth. So I became a much broader person after teaching 3 years of environmental science at San Diego State University. And why did I do that? Because I wanted to. I felt that, as they say, if you want to learn it, you teach it. So I figured if I don't know, I can teach it and learn it. And at the beginning, I remember very clearly that one of the professors asked me, he said, Ponce, you're going to teach environmental science? I say, yes. He said, but do you know the subject? And I said, well, you know, the clean part I already know. The dirty part I don't, but I will learn it. There's a part of environmental science that stinks or smells. And that I did not know, because that's technically at that time it was called sanitary engineering. And the other part that deals with the soils and the water and the environment and the air, I felt that I already knew roughly, so I could teach it, and I did teach it. So after that, I became aware of the issue of global climate change. So it was not until 1993 or 94 that I became aware that this problem was ongoing. And there was a meeting, I believe there was a meeting in Brazil in the year 1992, which I did not attend because at the time I wasn't really involved too much in it, but I realized its importance, that people from the world were getting together to discuss this issue. So I started looking into it and learning more about it. And by the year 1997, I had a visitor from India whose name was Surjit Kumar. He was a doctor in geology. He worked with the National Institute of Hydrology, and they sent him to study with me for 4 months. It was like a study tour, or study tour at San Diego State. So when Kumar came over here, we had to choose a topic for him to work on. And since I knew he was a geologist, and the geologists have a way of knowing about the earth and the formation of the earth and so forth, so I charged Kumar with helping me write this paper. He had 4 months. Actually, he wrote a couple of other papers, so he was busy in the 4 months that he was with me under my direction. And so I titled this paper, Global Climate Change, Sustainable Development and Environmental Ethics. Very comprehensive. We get into ethics even. We start with global climate change, We discussed sustainable development. How is it possible that you can have sustainable development? Why did we get in there? Because in 1997, when we wrote this paper, we published it in 1999, 2 years later. It takes about 2 years to publish. The word sustainable development had already been coined for 10 years. It was coined in 1987 at a meeting of the people from the United Nations in Europe somewhere. So before 1987, there was no such thing as sustainable development. But in 1997, 10 years have gone by, and the word sustainable development was already in vogue. People were talking about it. So we learned about it, and I decided to put that word also in our paper. Very important paper, very comprehensive. Unfortunately, I was unable to publish it in the US because it was too early and we covered too much. Global climate change in itself, it's already a huge field. Sustainable development is another huge field. Environmental ethics, even wider. So we were declined to publish in the United States. So I have friends in many parts of the world. I'm not going to say all over the world, but in many parts of the world, in Asia, in Latin America. So I was able to publish this paper eventually. I published it in a Brazilian journal. There was a university out there that had recently created a journal. They were good people and they wanted to do work. And they basically, one of the editors told me, Professor Ponce, we'd like to publish something from you. Just send anything and we'll publish it. So this is the story of this paper that we are about to read. Okay. So what is this about? Systemic analysis leads to the conclusion that the current global climate change is caused by two types of anthropogenic combustion. So this combustion, that's what it is. And it's anthropogenic, meaning we caused it, we produced it. Fossil fuel combustion, which everybody knows by now. And a lot of people yet don't know about this issue of permanent, indirect, artificial combustion, which we defined in here. You could call it PIAC. Permanent, indirect, artificial combustion is a way of fancy way of talking about how we replaced forests for grazelands for agricultural lands, and agricultural lands for urban lands, thereby not allowing trees to develop in those areas. And trees are the ones that are responsible for the majority of the organic matter that is produced by the ecosystems. So basically, it is artificial combustion. It's the same as burning, only that this is artificial. It's not that we're burning, we're not allow the ecosystem not to burn, which is the opposite. That's why we call it artificial. Is it indirect? Yes. And it is permanent? Yes. It is permanent to the extent that we're not going to go around and say, oh, well, you know, we don't like this city, we're going to destroy it and cultivate a forest on top of it. That's just simply not going to happen. It's not in the cards, okay? These combustions are returning carbon dioxide to the atmosphere at rates far exceeding natural rates of geological and biological carbon sequestering. Human societies must not continue their over-reliance on fossil fuel combustion to support their economic development or economic livelihood. In addition, for development to be sustainable in the long run, it must be redefined in such a way that it minimizes permanent, indirect, artificial combustion. So let's take a look. I'm going to give myself about 30 minutes, so I already got 15 minutes, so we're going to go relatively fast in here. You have all the time in the world later to check to see exactly if you have understood everything or grasped everything I have said. I am going to say, though, that that the content of this week is going to be reflected in that paper on the global, or rather the effects of global warming on the glaciers of Peru specifically, because there are a lot of questions out there, and they're mostly hydrology. What we're going to be talking in here in this first class is mostly politics. It's basically politics because it's all put together. So those of you that didn't think that we could get into politics, think again, because this subject in here is really a political subject. It's the issue of yours versus mine. But I have to do it because it's part of the knowledge that we need to learn in here. If anything, right after listening to me today, you're going to know a lot more about global warming that you did or knew before you came in here. Even though the subject's been around for 30 years, but in a lot of places it's still not understood. The issue remains controversial. Many people are skeptical that a problem exists, or if it does exist, that an anthropogenic cause is at the root of it. A lot of people say global climate change has always happened. What they fail to realize, willingly or unwillingly, is that yes, it has always happened, only that this time it's happening at a rate which is a lot faster, like 100 times faster than before. And it is anthropogenic. That we know for a fact. Like I said at the end, we have global climate change was produced in the long time ago by the volcanoes. A whole lot of volcanoes put a lot of CO2, global climate change. But that was over a period of years, millions of years, 1 million, 100,000. Here, we're doing this in 100 years. For the last 100 years, we have societies around the world have converted themselves into the new volcanoes. We're producing all the CO2 and causing a change in the weather. Why did we do this? Because we didn't know, obviously. At the time, we didn't know. When did humanity realize that this thing was going to happen? It was in the year 1896. There was a gentleman originating in Sweden. His name is Svante Arrhenius, who first wrote a paper on this subject, 1896. So the subject of global warming has been around for 127 years, 126 years. And yet it's still to be understood by everybody that matters, because for something to happen, to correct these issues, the politicians, the global politicians have to get together. And this is a problem that is not your problem or my problem. It's everybody's problem. We are all on the same ship, the ship Earth. We may have different nationalities, different cultures, different religions, different this, different that. But as far as being on Mother Earth's ship, we're all together on the same boat. So if the boat goes under, we're all going to go under. Actually, it's not going to go under. It's just going to change in a way that we may not like it in the future. When I wrote this paper in 1997, we recorded the ppmb, parts per million by volume, of concentration of carbon dioxide. We recorded that, well, not recorded it, we researched the value, 1998, and the number was 363. Now, I don't know if you guys follow this subject, but the current value, 2022, is around 418. So since I first began talking about this 25 years ago, the concentration has gone up from 363 to 418, which is roughly, what is it, 36%, it's about 15%. 15% in only 25 years of the concentration of carbon dioxide. That is extremely large change. The CO2 is the culprit. Well, there are other issues out there. There is, as I say in there, the CFCs, methane and nitrous oxide. Both methane and nitrous oxide could be produced by natural as well as artificial means, but they are small. Their effect in the global warming is smaller compared to carbon dioxide. And besides, carbon dioxide is the more anthropogenic component because of the issues of the vehicles, the combustion engine, the internal combustion engine, which is the culprit, the one that's producing most of the burning that we are considered to be global warming or global climate change. There's also the CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons, a chemical artificial product that was created about 50 years ago and that has now been superseded when societies are not using CFCs anymore. So that is of 1997. I think it was banned because of the global warming effects. So, and it was something that could be done, okay? So therefore, there is no problem of CFCs in the environment anymore. Or actually, I take that back, of new production of CFCs or production of new CFCs. But the CFCs that are out there still remain. We will have to consult with the atmospheric scientists as to exactly how long they're going to be there, affecting the weather. But that's a problem that we have done everything that we can to solve already as far as the CFCs. So we're not going to talk about it too much anymore, or here rather. So we're going to talk about here of the inputs and then the outputs of carbon dioxide, because that's the importance. The atmosphere is about 70 kilometers deep, 70 to 100. It actually diffuses into space. And the atmosphere is our atmosphere. If we didn't have any atmosphere, it would be too cold. We couldn't live. We need an atmosphere. So is the atmosphere, was it there all the time? And the answer is no. Geologists know that the atmosphere, at the beginning, there was no atmosphere. The percentage of the components was basically zero at the beginning, right? Presumably 4,560,000 years ago. That's when the solar system was created. 4 billion, not million, 4 billion. 4.6 followed by 9 zeros. Time in years. So the inputs of carbon dioxide are 1, geological, long-term and short, and 2, biological or anthropogenic, short-term. Volcanic eruptions, which have been occurring for the past 2.8 billion years, and I'm not exactly sure if this figure is correct. I was looking at it today, and I'm thinking that perhaps here I may have misquoted somebody. I have a quote in there for Cattermore. That's why I put it in there, because when I do this, I'm not talking about what I think. I'm talking about what the references in the authoritative references in the literature say about this. Okay, so there's volcanologists are basically the ones that know the subject. So volcanic eruptions have been around for a long time, presumably since the beginning of time. But they have kind of, the volcanic eruptions are the ones that change the weather. So if you have more volcanic eruptions, you have more CO2 and therefore warmer weather. If you have a period without volcanic eruptions, then the weather cools down and then we have a period of cool weather, which is what we have had, we meaning we here on the earth for the last 20,000 years. The combustion of inorganic matter adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, but the amounts are too small. On the other hand, the combustion of organic matter constitutes the main input of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Combustion of organic matter. What is this? That's the burning of oil, petroleum, that is organic matter. It was just organic matter that was hidden in the ground for millions of years. And we are taking it out and burning it to propel and power our vehicles. We started doing this in earnest, about 120 years ago. Started producing cars in mass quantities. Prior to 1900, only people that had a lot of money could own a car. After 1900, with the advent of the Model T that was developed by Henry Ford, just about everybody could have a car. I mean, a lot of people could afford a car after 1900. So we have had cars for 120 years now. Combustion may be either natural or artificial. Natural combustion takes place as respiratory combustion, the respiration of animals. I am combusting right now. Breathing is combustion. Respiration is combustion. I'm burning the food that I had today. Lunch, a snack I ate right before class. I always do that. I'm burning this stuff. If I don't have anything to burn, I can't live, I will die, right? So we have to eat just about every day in order to keep going. Burning gives us energy and allows us to live, basically. Artificial combustion, which is that produced by humans in the course of pursuing their livelihood, can be either direct or indirect. Direct artificial combustion is the actual burning of organic matter to satisfy basic energy needs, such as cooking, lighting, heating, air conditioning, and transportation. Direct artificial combustion is accomplished through biomass or fossil fuel. Why I say biomass? We don't use biomass here in the United States. But see, we're not the only country in the world. There's 240 countries, established countries, 240. There's all kinds of other people. There are other people, other cultures, other races, and so forth, and they use different things. For instance, in India, they used to use almost exclusively biomass. What is biomass? What biomass they were using? They were using cow dung. I happen to know that because in 1991, when I was first in India, was it first? No. Yeah, it was the first time I was in India. First I was in Pakistan in the 80s, but then I went to India. I was invited to go to India, and I saw for the first time the issue of the cow dung. Actually, I should take that back because I'm Peruvian, and I was in the highlands of Peru prior to that. And I saw the use of cow dung in many places that are very kind of remote areas. They have the dung, the cow, they dry it out for a couple of months and then they use it as fuel, right? So because it's nitrate, it's full of nitrate, and the nitrate is fuel. So interestingly, though, the people in India have decided over the last 30 to 40 years that they shouldn't be burning biomass. That's ridiculous. They should, but they're changing to fossil fuels. In the last 20, 30 years, we have seen a reduction on the biomass being used by the people in India. It used to be like 60%. Now it's only 30 to 20%. That is bad, isn't it? Because they're going the wrong way. But that's because they don't know. They have to figure it out and go back and correct the issues. Okay. Biomass is firewood, charcoal, animal dung, trash to energy. They're all recyclable. That means replenishable in the short term. Fossil fuels are not recyclable. You can't create oil. Oil's been there for 300 million years. We pump it, that's it. That's the end of it. We used it. Indirect artificial combustion occurs when humans act to reduce the biological or geological processes by which carbon is removed. So in other words, if you add carbon, that's direct. But if you do not allow the ecosystem to absorb the carbon, that is indirect. It is also combustion. It's artificial, but it's indirect. Paving of the land would be indirect artificial combustion. Do we pave the land? We've been paving the land for almost 100 years now. Yeah, the interstate highway system was created in 1955. That's 65 years. And we cover the entire United States, as you can see. Example of temporary indirect artificial combustion is slash and burn agriculture, practice which prevails in many primitive societies. Figure 1 is this figure that we did with Kumar. We put together our minds and spent some hours putting this together. This is supposed to be the complete carbon cycling through the ecosphere. That ecosphere is a combination of biosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is water, biosphere is the plants, and lithosphere is the rocks. And everything circulates into the atmosphere, returns to the atmosphere, right? Everything originates in the atmosphere. How does it originate in the atmosphere? Because it came from the volcanoes. The volcanoes spewed all this stuff into the atmosphere, and then it went into the hydrosphere, the biosphere, the lithosphere, only to return in the same and in the direction that these arrows are indicating in here. And we've tried to be comprehensive in here. And I believe we may as well have the most comprehensive graph that shows the carbon cycle. Carbon is the one of 140 elements in nature. I believe it has the atomic weight 14. I believe nitrogen is 12, carbon is 14, and oxygen is 16. Carbon is the basis of life. Nature decided that it, I guess you could say, was going to build life around the molecule of carbon because it has a lot of possibilities. It mixes with various other elements. So basically, we cannot conceive of a life that is not based on carbon. So the study or the issue of how does carbon circulate throughout the ecosphere is very important. And this is what we're talking about here. We have carbon dioxide inputs and carbon dioxide outputs. We have the circulation through the hydrosphere, lithosphere, biosphere, and it goes over here, as you can see. These are the two important ones. The fossil fuel is a direct artificial. It's artificial, yes. It's direct, yes. This one is artificial, indirect. This is permanent, the permanent indirect artificial combustion. Development as we know it. In the beginning, the world was full of forests. At the beginning, meaning maybe 10 million years ago, okay? But eventually, it changed. There were weather changes and so forth, and there were prairies, grasslands. Then about 11,000 years ago, agriculture was developed. And agriculture is not grassland. It is not prairie. It's different. Agriculture is artificial, completely artificial. It's our way of producing food so that we can survive and store the products so that we can survive, say, the winters. And then after agriculture, about came the development of cities. And we changed completely the situation over the years. 10,000 years, yes. 11,000 years at the beginning, development of agriculture, the development of cities, about 6,000 to 7,000 years, depending on who you talk to. If it's China, it's different than in the Middle East, Europe, and so forth. Here in the United States, we have been a country for 250 years, something like that. It's very short compared to what I'm talking about here. I've been mentioning 10,000 years, 7,000 years, and only 250 years in the United States. Many countries were just recently organized around the world. I remember when I studied geography in elementary school, I believe the number of countries in the world were 120 or 100, and now it's 240. How is it that happened in the last 40, 50 years? The number of countries doubled because they divided themselves. They fought and then they divided. And it continues to happen, by the way. I don't need to tell you all that. You also read the papers. The outputs. Now, we looked at the inputs. Now, let's look at the outputs. The outputs can be either biological, geological, or anthropogenic. Biological outputs are mediated, that is, occur through the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process that occurs at the level of the plants, organic matter, plants basically. The plants are taking the energy from the sun and water available in the surrounding environment and the nutrients that are in the soil. The plants pick up the nutrients from the soil by osmosis, and they use whatever nutrients they need and so forth. And that's related to, of course, to fertilization. If you want to produce a product of agriculture, you got to fertilize it in the right way. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Okay, so photosynthesis is a fundamental process of nature. Geological outputs occur as the net result of oceanic atmospheric interactions. There's a constant interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere. The ocean covers 69% of water. The ocean is 69% of the surface of the earth. The atmosphere surrounds the entire world and is constantly moving, circulating, rotating, and interacting with the ocean. And there's very little we can do to control it, by the way. You realize what I'm saying. It is correct. We can't control the hurricanes, for instance. The hurricanes form, and then that's it. And then we got to suffer. The main output of carbon dioxide is through biological sequestering. Photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide from the air and incorporates it into the biosphere as organic matter. In other words, photosynthesis is helping us control the carbon dioxide. That's why there are people, the tree huggers, so to speak, that like the trees because they feel that one way to solve the problem of excessive organic or carbon dioxide in the air is to bring it down through the usage of trees. But how many trees? And besides, we don't like trees. Humans don't like trees. And don't take me wrong on this. Don't take me wrong. People will have, if they don't know, will take me wrong. I say, hey, Professor Ponce, I like trees. No, sir. Most people do not like trees. That is the reason why in Southern California, 80% of the people live south of San Francisco. More than 80%. I don't have the numbers, but it's certainly more than 80%. South of San Francisco. And north of San Francisco, full of trees. And there's not that many people out there. Why? It's too wet, and therefore too many bugs. It's unhealthy. For us, it's better in San Diego. But it doesn't rain in here. No problem. We will solve that problem with hydraulics. And 100 years ago, started pumping the water from wherever it occurred, meaning Northern California, the Colorado River. So we pump the water from the Colorado River and from the rivers up north and bring them all the way over to Los Angeles and San Diego. So we're living on imported water. How much? That figure is established. 30% of the local water in San Diego originates here. 70% is imported. So if we had to rely only on the local water, meaning we don't have any hydraulic works and so forth, or rather we have the dams, but we don't bring water from afar, you could not support 2.5 million people here in San Diego County. You would have to support maybe 600, 700,000, but not 2.5 million people. We are here artificially. That has been said by many people. Reisner, who wrote the book Cadillac Desert, explicitly and very precisely talked about this issue of Southern California being an artificial ecosystem developed over the last 120 years for the purpose of utilizing hydraulics and hydrology to bring the water where the people are, because the people don't want to go where the water is. The issue of the Amazon rainforest is interesting and fascinating. When there's carbon dioxide, theoretically, that is going to propel the vegetation to grow, because the vegetation is going to find that there's more carbon dioxide and they like carbon dioxide. So as I say in here, evidence for the increase in biomass is scant and difficult to document. Although the Amazon rainforest, the largest terrestrial ecosystem in the world, covering 8 countries in South America, appears to be expanding along its perimeter. And we have a reference to Ponce, who one of the ecologists that studied the Amazon extensively. According to Ponce, and I believe other researchers, the Amazon is expanding at the rate of 70 meters along its perimeter per year. Think about that, 70 meters per year. That means in 10 years, 700 meters. In 100 years, 7 kilometers. Is indeed the Amazon expanding? And the answer is, gosh, I mean, that's what the ecologists say. I haven't been there. I haven't been there in the border of the Amazon. And the Amazon does have a border, although that border is basically a whole bunch of ecotones, which is a term in ecology that means transitional between 2 ecosystems, an ecotone. Because there's an Amazon ecosystem, Amazon rainforest, and then there's the peripheral areas which are not Amazon rainforest. And that happens a lot in Brazil and in Peru, by the way, because those are the 2 countries that are in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. Oceanic atmospheric interactions are presumed to be responsible for the additional sequestering of carbon. Yes, it's been said quite correctly that because there's so much carbon dioxide that was pumped over the last 50 to 100 years into the atmosphere, that the ocean is helping to adjust and is helping to absorb some of that carbon, because it has a lot to do with the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and so forth. It's a chemical problem. But the point I think that has been established is that the ocean is helping. It's helping absorb some of that extra carbon. But at what cost? It's been demonstrated now that the ocean is becoming more acidic. So that's not good. We're basically changing the ocean too. Okay, at the time I wrote this paper, not a whole lot was known about that subject. And since this paper reflects our knowledge, or my knowledge, in 1997, 98, we decided not to cover that in here. But it is happening, slowing the rate of near atmospheric terrestrial climate change while increasing the acidity of the oceans. That should not be the case in the long run. Geologic history. We owe this to our friend Budiko, a Russian scientist who in 1986 wrote a book, an excellent book, by the way, that I recently purchased it. I read it from the library at San Diego State. It's called The Evolution of the Biosphere. That is a fascinating book. And I decided that I was going to own that book. So good old Amazon came through. I bought it. I bought an old book, a used book of Budiko's 1986 work, which is one of the better works written on the subject. I quote Budiko all over here in this paper. Over the past 360 million years, can you imagine? It's 360 million years. That's 360 times more than 1 million years. And 1 million years is 5 times more than the entire history of the human race. The human race is considered to be about 100 to 200,000 years long in terms of Homo sapiens sapiens, because prior to that, we were just Homo sapiens. So in the last couple hundred years, our name changed to sapiens sapiens, meaning sapiens square, meaning smart. Last couple 100 to 200,000 years. That's what the scientists say. What prior to that, what? We were not Homo sapiens, or we were Homo, I don't know what it was. I'm not an anthropologist, but this is the story, that it's time is very important for us to understand what has gone on. Nature is nothing but, at the beginning of the 20th century, the carbon dioxide concentration was 299. The last glacial age, 21,000 years ago, it was the coolest. The concentration of carbon dioxide reached an all-time low of 190 degrees. Suffice it to say that if the concentration of carbon dioxide goes down, the Earth gets cooler and cooler. Too cold. That's the last ice age. So about 21,000 years ago, the situation changed, and this is a natural situation, by the way. Well, presumed to be natural. And it changed because there's always fluctuations in the weather. Nature is cybernetic. If it goes up, it has a tendency to come down. If it comes down, it has a tendency to go up. Only that we cannot predict with certainty the periodicity of these changes. So 21,000 years ago, it was the coolest or the coldest, and then it started warming up. 21,000 years ago, okay? Were people around here or there 21,000 years ago? Yes. It's been said that, that the entire population of America, north and south, came from Asia around that time when the earth started to cool, or when it cooled. The coolest period was the more pronounced. Okay, so at the beginning, fast forward to the beginning of the 20th century, the carbon dioxide was 299, so it got up to 109, from 190 to 299. The present level, 1998, when we wrote this paper, is 363. We already talked about that. And then I put in there today in bold, in the year 2022, the number is 418. If you don't believe me, all you need to do is Google atmospheric dioxide concentration in Mauna Loa, Hawaii, and you'll get the most current figure produced by NASA, the federal government. You cannot discuss the authoritative, how can I say, the authority of our NASA, right? National Atmospheric and Science Administration. They say it's 418. All this stuff, by the way, is credited to a gentleman that was working for Scripps Institution here in San Diego, which for the last 50 years, until he passed away maybe 10 years ago, dedicated his life to measuring the atmospheric carbon dioxide at a specific place that the scientists identify it to be in Mauna Loa, Hawaii. Why are we saying what happens in Hawaii is important in the United States or in Europe or in Asia? Because there is diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion is the characteristic of nature that if there is a concentration, it has a tendency to equalize, diffuse, and become equal throughout. You heard Professor Ponce talking about diffusion throughout this class, but I was talking about wave diffusion, not air or concentration diffusion. Diffusion is a term which applies everywhere, and I think I already said that, not only to waves, but also to concentrations, contaminants, and so forth. Impacts, I'm going to finish in here. Impacts, I'm going too long in here. Budico has estimated that air temperature was 25.5 Celsius during the lower Carboniferous period. That was warm, 25.5. 25.5, is that warm? Yeah, it's kind of warm, but it's not too warm. I mean, we survived 30 degrees Celsius, right? That's 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Compare that to the average global temperature at this point. What is the average global temperature? I don't know if you guys know that figure. I happen to know. The number is 17 degrees Celsius. So 17 degrees Celsius in Fahrenheit would be roughly 60. I believe so, because 68 is 20. 60 degrees Celsius is the average. So 25 is roughly to 95. So it was warmer. That was lower Carboniferous period. Temperature was 10.6 higher than at present. Present Budico, 1986, not now. Okay, so there's a little fuzziness in there. Major effects are the melting of the polar ice cap. So when the polar ice caps melt, all the water will go into the ocean, and the ocean is gonna rise in level. What is the calculation? The calculations show that complete melting of the polar ice caps will raise the global mean sea level by about 81 meters. So the coastal San Diego will be flooded. There's a whole lot of problems that will happen. Other areas which are flatter, below 81, will be covered completely by water when the whole thing melts. It is expected that if the rate continues, this thing will happen maybe in 50 to 100 years. Perhaps it's not going to affect us, but we shouldn't look at it that way. We should look at it from the ethical standpoint. Is this the right thing to do? And right, everybody knows what right is, whether they like it, whether they know it or not. Summary and conclusions. Input and outputs of carbon dioxide are examined. The issue of global climate change is essentially one of time scale. Since the year 1900, the human species is effectively acting as an agent of geological change. We are the new volcanoes. Climatic changes which would normally take place over millions of years are instead being accelerated to hundreds of years. In the geological past, carbon dioxide from volcanic eruption produced sudden global warming. Cooling has prevailed in the past 360 years, but warming has prevailed in the past 21,000 years. Compare 360 million years to 21,000, and then compare the 21,000 to the last 200, which is when we have been actively burning carbon or charcoal, carbon, I guess, and oil. We've been doing this for only 200 years, by the way. I believe the Industrial Revolution, the so-called Industrial Revolution, which happened in England around the year 1760 to 1770. So it's been 250 years, but at the beginning it was slow. It was not until the 1900s and then in the 20th century that it became big in terms of its effect. And now I'm gonna go in here, I'm going fast in here. It will be up to the next generation. This is a generational problem, meaning we're not gonna solve it in one generation. It's been going up for 3 or 4 generations already. In my mind, it'll take 3 or 4 generations to fix it, but we gotta start now. And we are starting, by the way, but we're just starting. There's a lot of things out there that we can't control at this point, political and otherwise, that does not allow us to continue on this path. Continue the replacement of fossil fuels with renewable sources. The monitoring of global climate change will continue, the aim being to eventually achieve a measure of stability in the concentration of atmospheric greenhouse gases. As I understand it, I'm pretty sure that Keeling, who was the gentleman that I already told you that at Scripps Institution here in San Diego, measured for 50 years the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration in Mauna Loa, he passed away maybe 5, 6 years ago, and he was succeeded in the job by nobody else than his own son, I believe. He left his son in place in there. Yeah, fascinating, isn't it? Okay, finally, I'm going to repeat this because I need to do this. Inaction on this issue, meaning if we don't do anything, effectively amounts to continuing an experiment of global proportions, that is, modeling with the quintessential prototype. Why did I bold this phrase? Because it's very important. Because we're engineers, right? Engineers do not model with the prototype unless they give up completely. There are a few, 1% model with the prototype, but the rest model with the model. We build in hydrology all kinds of models, which is equations in the computer and so forth. And you heard me talk about extensively in this class about models. I never said, you know what, let's go out there and experience this flood to see how it feels. That would be modeling with the prototype. That we have done it every once in a while, but we don't do it as a need to do that and to learn. I was caught in 2 or 3 floods throughout the course of my career in the middle, but it was by chance. And nothing that I could really experience other than the fact of taking a few pictures or shots and videos and so forth. That was good. So I can say that I've been on top of a flood, several actually, 2 or 3, because I was there and it so happened to rain heavily. But we don't learn from that. We learned, I myself, expert on floods through the 50 years of working with floods, for the equations of floods, the models of floods, not the prototype. So modeling with the quintessential prototype is actually giving up on science. Have we been doing that? Yes, in some sense we have. Because Arrhenius talked about this 120 years ago. And we're still working on it and trying to figure out what to do. 120 years, that's 4 or 5 generations. We're not moving fast. We're moving, but not fast. So to close, sustainable development may be unattainable unless global society takes bold and effective steps to effectively reduce its over-reliance on non-recyclable combustion. The issue having a global dimension, the question of environmental ethics arises. Is it right to recognize the global climate change issue now and act in a concerted effort? Yes, it is a concerted effort. The world has to get together. That's the difficult part. Nobody is alone in here. We're all together. Despite the apparently overwhelming evidence, it is right to continue to ignore the problem for the sake of short-term economic gain. Are we ignoring the problem? And the answer is yes. A percentage of society, global society as well as US society, is actually ignoring the problem. I don't want to get into details because it gets a little nasty. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there and move on to the next subject. So we already looked at the global carbon cycle, global warming milestones. I have a raster and a vector. So let's go with the raster on this one, okay? NASA. This graph was produced by NASA. Svante Arrhenius. He was the guy that told us from the beginning. I got a call from a professor in Canada. I will not mention the university. Honestly, I don't know. But he called me up about 10 years ago. And he said, Professor Ponce, I want to tell you that you're wrong. I said, really? Tell me about it. And he said, how is it possible that the carbon dioxide element being such a small percentage, 0.04% of the atmosphere, could have such a tremendous effect that everybody's talking about? That's wrong. You're wrong. I said to him, I'm going to send you a couple of papers and you judge it or figure it out for yourself. That's all I said. I wasn't going to get into an argument with somebody that didn't know. Two weeks later, he called me up again and he says, Professor Ponce, you're right. I looked at it and I agree with what they're saying. It's not an issue of percentage. It's an issue of chemistry, which he at the time did not realize or did not know. You see? So that's the story. Rosby. Number 2. Roger Randall Revelle. Revelle is his last name. He is our very own. He was a professor at UCSD back in the 60s. And he taught a lot of people at UCSD about the subject of global climate change. He was one of the early people to believe in global climate change. He was talking about this as early as 1968 or 1958. He was a professor of Al Gore, because Al Gore was taking a class out there somewhere in the East Coast, and this gentleman was traveling all over the United States lecturing. He was very famous at the time. As a matter of fact, you guys will recognize or realize that UCSD has 5 colleges. They're organized a little bit different, not like San Diego State. San Diego State is organized by topic or subject, and these people are organized by, I don't know what. I really don't know too much about it. But I know that one of the 5 colleges at UCSD is called Revelle College, in honor of this gentleman, Roger Revelle. This is Charles David Keeling. He's the guy that took it upon himself from the beginning to measure the atmospheric concentration. Because if you don't measure it scientifically and correctly, you can't sense it. People are not going to believe it. Actually, you can in the long term. But it's better to have the data, right? So this gentleman single-handedly, well, I shouldn't say single-handedly, he was working with Scripps Institution, which is one of the premier oceanography and scientific institutions in the United States, based here in San Diego, by the way. So Charles David Keeling. And finally, our friend Albert Arnold Gore, who was Vice President of the United States for 8 years with President Clinton. And the history of this gentleman is fascinating. In 1991, he wrote a book called The Earth in the Balance. He is by training, I believe, a newspaperman. He used to work in the military, I mean, when he was young and so forth. And he became a senator, I believe, from the state of Tennessee. I could be wrong on that one. But at any rate, he became a senator, and then he wrote this book. And when Clinton got the nomination in the year 1991, because he was president from 1992 to the year 2002 periods, he was looking for a vice president. And he came across the book that had been written by Gore. And the book was so good, well written and cogent about the subject of global warming, which Clinton thought at the time was a good subject, which not too many people knew at the time. And basically, Clinton offered Gore the job of vice president, and he took it, and he stayed there for 8 years based on that book. I, at the time, was learning about these subjects and was one of the first to read the book by Gore. It's called The Earth in the Balance. And I was impressed by the book. It opened my eyes in several issues, by the way. Not to say that that I know everything at the time, but I mean, I was beginning my opening to environmental issues, and I appreciated very much the book by Gore, which I have it out there somewhere. I may reread it when I'm retired. It's a small book. A couple, 3 hours, you can read the entire book. But that was Albert Gore. He wrote the book and he became vice president. The story later is not a good story to tell, and I don't think I'm going to do it. We don't have the time. The short story is that he ran and he lost for about 300. He ran for president in the year 2000, and he lost by 200 or 300 votes, which is a very small percentage, 0.1% or something like this. And then there was an issue of a fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court and so on and so forth. And then he did not become president. You know the rest of the story? You may not know. The rest of the story is he was forced to retire, didn't know what to do. And he started talking about the subject that he knew very well, which is global warming. He went all over the world and developed a slideshow of global warming. And then the slideshow in the year 2005 became a movie because somebody must have seen the slideshow and told Al Gore that that should be produced in a movie. So they engaged Hollywood or somebody out there, and they produced a movie in the year 2004, 2005. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was about global warming. That is when the name Al Gore became a household word. Prior to that, he was the vice president, but that's it. Around the world, people didn't know too much about him. But after he wrote that second book, which was a collection of slides, an explanation and so forth about global warming. And then he was given the Nobel Peace Prize, I believe in the year 2005. And he immediately became famous all over the world for having done this, Nobel Peace Prize, you know? So that's the story with Al Gore. He is still alive 17 years later, but he is an older gentleman at this point. My guess is he would be at least 10 years older than I am. So if I'm 76, he would be 86 right now. I don't know. You can Google him and find out how old he is. But that's Albert Gore. He's still around. In my book, he's a good man. That's my book. That's not everybody's book. Some people don't like Al Gore. Why? I don't know. I don't want to get into that. Right there, I was wrong. He's 2 years younger than I am. So he could be around for at least 10 more years. 1948, 2 years younger than I am. Brought the subject of global climate change to the average person. How do I know that? In the year 2000, I wrote a paper about this. Actually, it was an article. It was a very good article. And in the year 2005, it reached the visits, the number of visits of this article reached a peak of about 500 per day. And in the course of the life of this article, which is still out there, which we're going to read next time, by the way, it garnered 500,000 visits. But the peak of the visits to that site was in the year 2005, 2006, 2005. Why? Because around the world, people didn't know about global warming until Al Gore talked about it and made it popular. And after that, they Googled, right? They went to global warming. Let's go to Google and find out what this is all about. And the first thing that came out in Google, because Google, like Professor Ponce, was my site, because my site is very clear and very down to the point. So I got a lot of visits just because global warming was made popular by Al Gore. And I have the numbers to show. I'm not faking. The Keeling curve. Keeling, 1958, born. No, I'm sorry, I take that back. This is not Keeling life. It's this graph started in 1958 and is presented here to 2019 because this is the last time, that's the last graph I had. But the graph continues. If you want to go now, it'll go to 2020, 21. And if you notice in here, it is about 412, but actually it's gone up to about 4,418 now. It's around here at this point, 2020. It is a trend that continues to go on. It's a trend, right? You can extrapolate the trend whichever you want, conservatively or in the other side, but it goes like this. And right now it's around here, 2 years after 2020. That's the famous Keeling curve. And why does it have a sinusoid? It's about the center of the sinusoid, because it depends on the vegetation. The vegetation absorbs carbon dioxide, and the vegetation changes seasonally around the world, annually, as a matter of fact, and produces a sinusoid. So the sinusoid in here is the effect of photosynthesis, which draws carbon dioxide. So here will be the summer, and here is the winter of this particular northern hemisphere, because Mauna Loa is in the northern hemisphere. Okay, so that's basically the Keeling curve, and that's the end of this video here. Okay, so the last paper we are going to is not a paper. It's the global warming puzzle. How many people does one car amount to? Okay, let's do the video. I'm kind of in the mood for a video. If time permits, we will go to the vector. We just produced this video this year, at the beginning of this year. The global warming puzzle. How many people does one car amount to? What's the history of this in terms of Professor Ponce's development? That I knew that this could be done, this calculation here could be done, I knew, but I didn't know how to do it. So I waited. The idea occurred to me maybe around the year 2005. We can do this. We can figure out how much an average person breathes, meaning combusts, because breathing is combustion, respiration of your own food, right? Combustion of your own food in order to live, right? And living means your heart is moving, you can move, if you're awake, you can move around and so forth. I don't need to tell you that. A car does the same thing, only the car is burning not food, but is burning gasoline. But it is the same process, it's the same process of combustion. The only difference is that the human being is doing a biological combustion and the car is doing physical chemical combustion, but it's the same thing, it's combustion. So the issue is, how many people does one car amount to? Normal, talking about the average person and the average car. So we first need to figure out what an average person looks like or is, and then the average car. And we did that. But the issue was an issue of physics versus biology. Where's the link to do that? And I couldn't do it because I'm not a chemist and so forth. Chemical people were not interested in doing this, by the way. I don't believe there is this calculation anywhere else. I've been told by many people, okay? So what I wanted to do, and I couldn't do it, I tried to engage a friend of mine who was a mechanical engineer because I thought the problem was mechanical because you're burning gasoline and, you know, he couldn't do it either. After 2 or 3 years, he sat on it and he says, no, I can't do it. And then he retired. So I was out of luck. And of course, Professor Ponce is Mr. Luck, okay? When I was working with, in the Pantanal, I had a friend who was my boss at the time, and he was working for OAS, and OAS is the Organization of American States. And when I was in Washington visiting, he had a whole bunch of books out there, little books, pamphlets. And I was interested in those books because I thought that they were publications that they were putting together. And I just wanted to see what they were working. And he handed me a whole bunch of them, like 6 or 7 of them. He says, hey, Ponce, you can take it. This is the stuff that we do here. So I took it home. And I had it for about, I don't know, 1980, 1990, to the year about 2010. Yeah, about 2000 and beginning of the year 2010, so we 2012. And one day I was reading one of those books and I came across the solution for this problem. I immediately jumped off my seat and said, heck, this is what I was looking for 10 years. So I'm gonna tell you the story. I'm gonna actually show you the video because I'm already tired. And I know you guys are tired too. The video is easier. So let's look at the video. How many people does one car amount to? Why did I do this? Well, we know that the population of the Earth in the year 1900, I checked it this morning because I wanted to make sure. I thought it was 1 billion, but no, it's not correct. It's 1.6 billion, the population of the Earth in the year 1900. Fast forward 122 years into the future, that is into the present, and the current population of the Earth is 8 billion. We just passed 8 billion a couple months ago. So we went from 1.6 to 8. That is 5 times. So that's the population of the Earth has gone up exactly 5 times in the last 122 years. That's on the record, okay? So there's a lot of people which are breathing, okay? And that breathing is replenishable, so to speak. In a sense, replenishable, but there's a lot of people in the occupied space and so forth, and there's a lot of troubles nowadays because of that. I don't want to get into that, it's kind of messy. But the issue is not only there's a lot of people, there's a lot of cars out there. So how many cars out there? And the question is, how many people does one car amount to? Which is what we're going to answer here. Let's go for it. Individual car usage, gasoline mileage, 13 kilometers per liter. That's to move the car. We move 13 kilometers per liter. The consumption averages 4.09 liters per day. Here it is. Here is the culprit. The average density of gasoline, 0.74 kilograms per liter. $3,000 grams per day of gasoline consumption per car. Average energy release by the burning of gasoline. We need to eat 2,000 kilocalories per day in order to move, to survive. So a vehicle consumes 16 times more energy than a person. I'm going to go over a couple of minutes, by the way. 8.037. I did this morning. That's the latest figure. This figure is hard to find, 1.4 billion cars. It's a very hard figure to find. So in terms of equivalent respiration, there's not 8 billion people. There's people that amounts to the amount of respiration because of that 8 billion people amounts to 32 billion. Let me reiterate, the last class is going to be this Wednesday, and I'm going to be talking about the practical issues of global warming. And then next Monday, we're going to have my, what I call my farewell lecture, meaning the last lecture, the last official lecture I'm going to give here at San Diego State University, in which I have taught for the last 43 years, an entire life, as you can see. And then after that, we're going to have the exam. I believe the exam is coming on the 12th. Thank you very much. I will see you this Wednesday.